Larry was born in Houston, where I was born and raised in Houston. Not born in Houston, but grew up in Houston. He was 2 years old when we moved here to Pier Park. He's the oldest of the three boys.
So I was barely born in the 50s.
Yep, I guess so.
I don't remember living in Houston.
No, you were 2 when we moved here. We stayed with Mama and Papa for probably 9 months or so until Gary was born. Then my dad came over here and helped Dad build this house. And then we moved into here when Gary was born.
I know I was, 4 years old when I broke my arm?
Yes, I had gone to a shower with Mama, and you climbed into Daddy's big boat that he had over there that Mr. Dwaron, I think, had given him. Or is that one that we brought from Houston?
I don't remember.
You
But he
crawled
said I
into the
was 4
boat
years
and you
old.
fell out of it. And when I got home, Daddy was holding you on his lap and saying, well, Larry hurt his arm. And when I took a look at it, the bone was sticking out. I said, oh,
Yep,
broke his arm.
It looked something like that.
So we took you to Dr.
Still
Peltier, and he saw that it was broken and that you were young, so he sent us to Baton Rouge to a doctor to have your arm set. So, and I think they took you in the room, but they wouldn't let me go in there with you, and you were screaming and hollering for Mama, but they wouldn't let me go in there. So do you kind of remember that, having
Nope.
the broken arm? You don't?
Nope. I just remember that it grew back crooked with a hump in it.
Well, they
And
didn't.
it's still that way.
Because they just really said it. I don't think they actually, did like surgery or something. It kind of
Well,
was
look
in
at
your,
it.
was in your elbow,
See that?
and they didn't set.
So you got a hump on it?
He didn't set it at the time. Like sometimes they'll do surgery on it or something, but they didn't do it. But it grew back. It's never given you any problems.
Well, I
though.
remember you telling me that they thought maybe my left arm would grow shorter than my right arm because of that hump I have in it.
But no.
But it didn't. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, but it still got that.
Well, and then y'all, of course, all of you went to school here in Pier Park, but
Well,
I
I
don't-
mean, if you want to keep on going backwards, not necessarily, but that was when I was 4. When I was 6, you remember I caught pneumonia, and I spent how long in the hospital? A couple of days. I don't know. I was-
here in Pier Park?
yeah, the
Yeah,
hospital here in Pierre Port.
Well, Dr. Peltier, yeah, he kind of had a couple of rooms that yeah.
I don't know what it was, but I had pneumonia when I was 6, and I spent a few days in the hospital.
That's,
I didn't know I had pneumonia.
that kind of slipped my mind a little bit. But
Yeah, I think it was 6 years old.
then I remember how y'all, but do you remember that we were always doing something in the house? I know as you were growing up, y'all used to even help Dad with a lot of, get things for him and whatever. But then,
Well, I remember when we were. I
older.
remember before we started
Yeah, older, yeah. Y'all,
remodeling the house.
yeah, that was remodeling.
Which now your dining room used to be a front porch.
Back porch.
And
But
then
you started school when you were 5, I think.
I didn't go to kindergarten though.
They didn't have kindergarten over here at the time when
I
y'all
was-
started.
I was 5 and a half.
Yeah, because they let y'all start. Your birthday is in November, but they let you start. So y'all were about 5, almost 6, but
But
not
you
quite.
you talked about working on the house and all, but I remember before we started working on the house, that was a porch, a screened-in porch
Yeah, the back porch.
where the dining room is.
Yeah. And the year that we decided to add on this living room, it actually snowed on the cement. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And we hardly ever have snow here, but they had snow on the cement.
Ooh, but that's moving up a few years. That
Yeah,
wasn't.
well, that's
that
okay.
was
You don't
70,
have to. You don't have to. You don't have to go in order, though.
That was 73
Yeah.
when the high water came up, and we barely had the walls. We had the roof on in here.
And
I think
behind
we
the-
had the studs up with the roof on it, and I remember Daddy had an old upright stereo that had everything in it, and we shoved it up in the attic through the rafters, through the ceiling joist,
had
blocked
hanging.
it up in case it would get wet. we had stuff hanging from the ceiling.
But we stayed here. We didn't move out. I mean, like a lot of
Well,
people.
water didn't get get
Yeah.
over here.
So because it didn't come really to get close enough to really flood our house. So we stayed here.
Well, even before that though, you remember we used to have a fence all the way around the house.
Yeah, we had a fence because of you kids. The body of being so close, Daddy was always afraid.
We had a fence all the way around the house,
Yeah.
and before this room was even here. And about where the front of the house is right now, they had the fence came together and they had two gates. They're made out of pipe. They had pipe frame and then they had the fence in it and they'd swing open. There was two gates that would swing open. And I remember me and Gary used to ride our bikes from up on the road, go as fast as we can, and we'd come down in front of them gates and we'd try to slide sideways in the gravel because all that was gravel.
We didn't have a paved
But that was a fence all the way around.
paved street or driveway or anything. Yeah. In fact, for a long time before we had even the gravel, we had to stop on the other side of the ditch and walk from there,
Yeah, I remember
carry
it got-
groceries and all across that.
I remember it
ditch.
got kind of nasty. They had gravel. Pretty much had gravel right in front, right there where the gates were and all.
Yeah, but we didn't. We didn't have it all the way across. Well, and then
We
in,
still got some of the fence posts.
in elementary school, you didn't. I don't know if they had. Were they playing football or anything at the time? But all of you kids, like you and
No, I played football in 7th and 8th grade
okay, because
over
you
over here
you
in Pierre Part because the school. Well, at the time it was still elementary school. They didn't have a primary and a
middle.
middle school. It was all the way through the 8th grade. So I played football in 7th and 8th grade. And when I was in 7th grade, we had an undefeated team. And they didn't have another one until about 10 years ago. I think we were the only ones. It was the 1971 Pierreport football team
Now,
was
what?
undefeated.
How old were you when you joined the band though? You were in the.
I was in
You started band and went.
4th.
You
Fifth
took up.
grade.
You took up the trumpet. You decided you wanted to play trumpet.
I started in band when I was in 5th grade.
Okay, and then when you went to high school, and even when you went on to Nichols,
Now-
you always played in the band.
When I went to, before I went to high school though, they used to have a junior high, and it was only one grade. It was 9th grade.
Right.
I was the second class at that junior high. They had one class the year before us. I was in junior high that next year, and a couple of years later, they did away with it.
Well, Gary did. Gary was in that junior high too, I think.
Did he?
Yeah, I think so. Barry said he was too. Barry was too.
A lot of people don't know that Assumption Junior High was the Roadrunners.
Yeah, but okay.
But
So
that's
you
where I
loved.
went to 9th grade. Went to 9th grade it's where the Napoleonville Middle School is right now.
Right, but you
That used to be the junior high.
you didn't want to go into football in high school though. You wanted to stay in band and play in the band. So you went on through high school. Didn't you win no, you didn't win the award, the band director's award in high school.
No, when was it in 9th grade? That's the first year they had an all-star band at Nichols, and all the high schools from around the area sent students to go play in the all-star band, the District 7 all-star band, and the whole idea was they put us all together from
Make
different
one.
high schools, and we ended up playing at the halftime show at a Saints game. And what?
Yeah.
Just wait a
I
minute.
do remember though.
What I remember about it though, when I did that first year I was in that All-Star band, we played the halftime show at the Saints game, but it was at the old Tulane Stadium. It wasn't in the Superdome. And I remember, I tell people to this day that I work with, I got a chance to see Joe Namath play for the New York Jets against the Saints live at Tulane Stadium. And they said, what? Because Joe Namath is ancient. But I saw him play. That's before he retired. It was at the old Tulane Stadium, and that was when I was in ninth grade.
Okay. Yeah. But all this time when y'all were growing up too, even though Daddy was, well, at first he had his electrical shop there that he tried to work on lawnmowers and what, but then he went with the sheriff's office, but he always planted big gardens and whatnot. So you kids always had to
No,
help out.
Daddy planted a big garden because Papa said we had to.
Oh, was that it?
Yeah, if we didn't
Planted a lot of potatoes.
if we didn't plant a big garden, Papa thought things weren't right in the world. We had to plant a big garden so we'd harvest enough potatoes to eat as many as we could and sold the rest so they can buy seed for the next year.
But I remember too, y'all used to say, all of you kids, y'all be coming home on the school bus, and Daddy would be out in the field plowing up the potatoes, and you'd feel like getting on the bus and going back to school because you knew you'd have to be out there picking up those potatoes.
No, picking up potatoes wasn't the bad part. The bad part was after he closed the rows up because Papa was scared it was going to rain. And it didn't matter because it's dirt, but if Papa figured if you didn't close up those rows and it rained in them, everything was ruined. So you had to close up the rows, and after you did that, you had to open the drains up
With the shovel.
with a shovel to make sure all the water drained out of the garden in case it rained. So it had to be done that day. Couldn't wait till tomorrow. It had to be done that day.
While we're on the subject of the garden too, we used to plant corn, but we had peas and all planted between the corn. You remember how we used to pick those peas, and then what, at night, sitting down and watching TV or something, here we were all shelling peas. And
What fun.
your sister revealed here to me, not with her conversation one time, that when I wasn't looking, well, y'all were popping peas across the room at each other to kind of take the monotony out of the whole thing of sitting there shelling peas. And
How else you going to derive any pleasure out of shelling peas?
but y'all grew up knowing.
But we
that-
used to have to go pick corn, and Daddy always picked the hottest day, and it was wet and it was hot, and we'd go through the rows and pick corn, and he'd pick them and he'd throw them to me, and I'd put them in a sack. We had to carry the sack down the row. But back to the potatoes. We had to dig potatoes one time because Papa said that we got to get them out the ground because if it was wet, which is not a good time to dig potatoes, but if we didn't dig them up, they were going to rot in the ground. So Daddy said, well, I guess we'll go ahead and dig them up. So he got on a tractor and he plowed them open, and there were some big ones. There were some nice potatoes. But we had all rubber boots on. And we going down the rows, and what we do, we pick the potatoes up and you try to rub the dirt off of them. You either throw in the middle of the row or in a bucket. Then we put them in sacks. And I would come with the pickup truck, usually Papa's pickup truck, drive through the rows, and we put the sacks in the truck, bring them back to the shop, and we put them on the floor. Well, that year, it was wet, but the potatoes were really nice. And I remember walking alongside Papa. He was so excited. He had a pair of black rubber boots on, but the little tip on the toe was red. And I saw Papa reach down to grab what he thought was a big old potato and get the dirt off of it, and he ended up grabbing his toe. He grabbed the toe of his boot that was red, thinking it was a potato, because he was so excited because the potatoes did good that year. But they were muddy, and it was hard to tell what was a potato, what was not. And he reached down and grabbed his toe.
when you mentioned the thing of driving the truck, do you remember? Did you take driver's ed in high school when you
I took driver's ed in ninth grade
Okay.
because
but
I was because
Dad-
I was 14, almost 15, where I could get.
But you
A
had
driver's
learned.
license.
You had learned to
I already knew how to
drive. But do you remember? Daddy had a truck that you had to shift the gears, and
Well-
you didn't know how to do that.
But I learned how to drive on a tractor first, though. I knew how to clutch because
Well-
you have to clutch to drive a tractor.
Now-
but
now
I
wait a
didn't-
minute.
I didn't know how to shift through the gears.
So you could drive it up to one time. Daddy wanted you to drive the truck up to so he could pick up something. So you got in the truck and you drove it up to the ditch that's dividing the property here. And Daddy said, "Okay, back up." Well, you didn't know how to back up, so I told you. I said, "Larry, get your behind out over there." And I said, "If you don't learn how to shift this thing, you're gonna get out of here." So I got in there and I showed you how to shift gears because I drove a car when I started driving. I had to shift gears and all that, so I knew how. So I got in there and I showed you a few times, and you caught on to it. So there you went. You learned how to shift gears so you could back up.
No, it started off where I could back up before I could go forward.
Or something, but you didn't know how to shift
I could
gears.
put it in reverse because I had to back the truck up to the edge of this ditch that goes between what was my ma's and y'all's property.
Okay.
And they had mountains of dirt, and we were shoveling the dirt into the truck, or I was, and hauling it off somewhere else. So I would back the truck up, and I'd load the back of it up, but then I'd have to get you to come and drive it out of there. I would back it up.
Okay. So I told you that if you didn't learn how to shift that, you're gonna get out of there, and I was gonna do the driving.
Well,
So.
it didn't take long. I just needed to know. Nobody ever showed me the shift pattern
Yeah.
until I asked you.
So yeah, and it wasn't your daddy that showed you; it was me that taught you how to.
I know
Yes.
he let me drive a tractor.
Yeah. So, anyways, I
But
I
that
don't
was,
know why. I remember that.
That was a '68 Chevrolet pickup. I remember it was black and white,
Oh yeah.
and I learned how to. That's the first vehicle I ever drove was a '68 Chevy pickup with a manual transmission.
But actually, like you said, you knew how to drive before you took driver's ed because you were driving around here in the pasture and all
No,
over.
Driver's ed, they had a car with automatic transmission.
Yes, but I mean,
That wasn't nothing.
no, but I know you had already learned to drive and all that. Though.
Yeah,
That's
because
what I'm saying.
later on, I ended up driving a school bus when I went to college, and that's manual transmission. So you have to know how to clutch and shift and all. There wasn't nothing to that.
Yep.
But yeah, that was I don't know exactly when that was. It was somewhere in the mid '70s because it was a '68 Chevy pickup, and
It was old.
I must have got my driver's license. I know when I was 15.
Then you could get it younger. Yeah.
Yeah, you could get it when it was 15 years old.
But do you remember though? Even after you got your driver's license, you weren't allowed to drive too much by yourself unless somebody else was in the car with you. And being your daddy was always. He was a deputy at the time, I think, already. And so who had to accompany you every time you went somewhere? It was me. I had to go with you because you could.
Oh, we used
Well,
to.
in fact, it's because we didn't want you out on the road by yourself either until we were sure that you knew.
Well, we used to go to the store, which is about a quarter of a mile down the road from here.
Yeah, but
We did that enough.
yeah, so. But anyway, so that was some of the things growing up. Of course,
there's a-
I remember when y'all were growing up too. When y'all come home from school and Daddy home from work, I'd always have supper cooked. Larry was the one that he'd always go and raise the lids on the pots to see what was in the pots. He always wanted to know what was cooking and how. He always paid attention to how something looked and how it, you cooked it and all that. And I guess that's why today he's such a good cook. Because Daddy doesn't know how to cook at all. But
Well-
Larry was the one that was always interested in.
I tell people I look at how something's prepared, and I ask what's in it,
That's what.
and I pretty much figure out how to put it together and all that. So
Well, that's what
just by watching you and
Well, that's because you always wanted to know what was
And-
what was in the pot.
your mama, I watched her do
Yeah.
some things.
Right. And yeah.
I used to watch my mama over here boil sweetened condensed milk in a pot where I know some people today wouldn't even attempt that. They're scared that the can would blow up. How many times I saw my mom take a can of sweetened condensed milk, put it in water in a pot, and boil it on the stove
To do it on a cake.
to pour it over a cake, which is my favorite cake.
And
A
hadn't
yellow
that-
cake with boiled sweetened condensed milk, which caramelizes it.
Right.
And you pour it over the cake, and then you put crushed pecans on it.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, that was you.
Yep, my mom was the first one that ever made one that I tasted like
Well,
that.
yeah, because growing up, my mom never did any cakes like that. I mean, mom she baked delicious cakes and all that, and she'd make everything from scratch, just like my mom did. But that wasn't one of the
Well, yeah, my
kinds
grandma
of
used
cakes.
to make all those pies and all that.
Well, yeah,
Peach pies.
well, yeah. And I used to do that too. The pies. I was good at making pies, but I wasn't too good at making cakes, and I'm still not.
I don't know, but that cake with that caramelized sweetened condensed milk and the pecans, man, that's.
I
hard
also
to beat.
remember too that you were one of the first ones that took over cutting grass in the yard and all when you got old enough, because it was me that always. Daddy was never around much to cut the grass. He didn't have time with everything going on. So, and we had a push mower. We didn't have a riding mower.
Yep, I remember that.
So you had to get out of there, and you took over cutting the grass. So, anyways, I remember too when we used to have to rake the leaves around here with all these trees we've got, these oak trees, and we'd have the whole family out there raking leaves. And boy, they didn't like that. None of you liked that.
Oh, joy.
But and then at one time too, Dad used to cut the pasture and store hay in the barn, because we did have a few cows at one time.
Yeah,
And,
not the same barn that we got right now, but
Kind of like that, and found out years
Well,
later that you guys used to get in there and jump on that hay and hide things in the hay and all that other kind of stuff.
it's almost where the barn is right now. Same general area.
Yeah. Did Dad tear down the old one, or is that just added on to it?
Don't know. We tore it down completely and started over. But that's where, because I remember how it was shaped. I remember the tractor. We had a tractor pulled into a bay, and then off to the side, they had a little covered pen where you could put like a little calf in there or something. Mm-hmm. And then they had a bigger pen on the outside. That's where you used to bring the cows in, because you remember you taught me how to milk a cow right there.
Well, yeah, because I didn't know how to milk a cow till I moved over here. And
A lot of people
Mama,
ain't never done that either. is
Mama
milk a cow.
was the one that would milk the cows around. And we'd actually drink the cow's milk too. We'd scald it on the stove and drink cow's milk. But then Mama had to go to take care of her mother when she was real sick, so nobody around here to milk the cows, so I had to learn to milk a cow. So you became interested in knowing how to, so, or maybe it was because of necessity, I don't know, but you learned.
I don't know, but it was in that barn over there. I remember we
learned
had
to milk a cow too.
learned how to milk a cow. I don't remember how old I was. I was still kind of young.
I don't know either, how old you were, but. Oh.
But I remember milking a cow, and I remember Daddy and Papa had a few of them. I remember we had pigs. I think where my house is at right now is where a pig pen used to be. It was right in the middle of the field.
They'd raise a couple of pigs at a time. Yeah,
Yeah,
one,
but that was later on, though. Then they started putting them out by the bayou.
yeah.
They had a couple of them in the pen by the bayou, and Daddy and Papa would raise 2 pigs a year, just to say they did it, because it cost them more to raise it than if you could go out and buy the meat.
Yeah, but they'd actually slaughter them, and we'd.
Oh, I know that.
We'd have them
Yeah.
for.
Except one year, they bought 2 pigs, 2 little ones, and one of them died. Papa told Daddy that was his. Daddy's pig died, not his. So I remember that.
Oh, and do you remember too? We had some chickens at one time too. We raised a few chickens,
No, we had chickens and ducks and rabbits and.
and then remember the time though? I didn't know that happened, but y'all went out in the chicken yard, I think, to, I don't know, to feed the chickens or something, and the rooster took after you. And you gave it a big, good kick,
Oh yeah.
and you thought, oh, God, I'll kill the son of a gun. Remember?
Well, he laid on the ground, just kind of flopping around, kind of doing like that. So well, better him than me.
No, that's not what you said. You were afraid your daddy was going to get you behind. And you were so glad when that rooster got up and started running around.
But I had one of them that was in the shed that used to get up in the top of the shed, and he'd fly down and he'd try to get on your back. That was one of them little bantam roosters. I grabbed him a couple of times and slammed him to the ground because he'd perch up there and he'd try to get you.
Okay, so now let's kind of move on to when you went on to college, to Nichols.
Oh, there's a lot of time in between there.
Well, I know your high school and all this, but then you went on to Nichols, and you still stayed in the band. You played your trumpet, and
Well, like I said, the first 3.5 years, I went to Nichols. I drove a school bus from over here.
yeah. So
I commuted instead of living on campus, so I ended up driving a school bus for the parish.
and you'd get paid for doing that, so that would help you with your tuition, and
Yep, $24 a day.
and would help you with the tuition and help buy books and stuff like that, and help us out because
Yep. Drove that bus for $24 a day. They provided the gas and all that stuff, but I got the worst bus that the parish had because I broke down a lot. But for the most part, I made it to school. Oh, about losing the wheel? Oh, yeah. Well, that wasn't nothing. I lost the wheel one day.
he was driving along on the highway, and the wheel
Front wheel.
start rolling away.
It was the middle of the winter time, January. I was coming back from school. I had about, I don't know, dozen people there. And I got just crossed the bridge in Grand Bayou heading this way. And it felt like the front end of the bus hit the pavement. And the wheel started shaking, and I didn't know what was going on, and I was on the brakes trying to stop it. Ended up stopping, straddling the center line. And when I finally got out, after I killed the engine and all that, I looked and went outside, and the left wheel was gone.
But didn't you say some of the students on the bus said they saw the wheel rolling along the fence?
Well, after I talked to them, somebody said they hollered, "Hey, look at that wheel," and they realized it was the wheel off the bus. It passed us up. It jumped a 8-foot deep ditch and ended up lodged in a hurricane fence. And yeah, the axle was sitting on the ground. I had brakes and springs about 200 yards behind me. I ended up going and pull the wheel out of the fence. It was cold, I remember, because I had a pair of black leather gloves on, and then I had no heater in that bus. But it was yeah, that was an experience.
So then, while you were at Nichols too, Carol was in the band too. So you and Carol started dating, and then you, right after graduation, or how soon after that you and Carol got married?
What? That's where everything went downhill?
Is that what you think?
I don't know. That's what I'm looking at signs and symbols, and somebody did something like that. And to me, that's when it went downhill, huh?
Peanut Gallery is doing charades.
So what? How long after you graduated did y'all get married? Do you remember from college?
I graduated in December of '81, and we got married in April of '82.
Well, y'all got married later because your sister was being older than you. She was getting married first, so y'all decided y'all let
like
her.
I said, well, I wanted to graduate from college too, and I didn't finish until December of '81.
Okay.
We ended up getting married, like I said, in April of '82.
And Debbie and Rocky got married 6 months before you.
Oh, you want me to tell a story about falling in a hole? Huh? Yeah.
Oh,
Story time.
yeah. I always told the kids when they'd go out on a Saturday night, of course, they didn't have their own vehicle. They used the family car. So, and they had a time to be in. But when they went to college, they were allowed to come in later than they did when they were in high school. So one night, I told them, I said, you can't sneak into the house, because they knew that I was a very light sleeper, and they knew. So when they'd come in the front door almost, they'd say, well, okay, Mom, we're home. And they know I'd hear them. So they knew they couldn't sneak in here without me knowing what time it was. So this one particular night, it was his time to be in, and he wasn't here yet. So I was looking at the clock. Phone rang. It was Larry. He said, Mom, do you know where I am? I said, I don't know where you are, but I know where you should be right now. And then he told me, I'm stuck in a cesspool. I said, Joe, what? He said, I'm stuck in the cesspool. So tell him about that.
You already did.
Nope. Where was it? Tell him about it.
Me and Carol went out somewhere one night. I don't know where it was. I was in a Ford LTD. And I brought her home that night at her house. And when I pulled up in the driveway, pretty much where I always did, didn't really notice nothing. You know, we said goodnight. She went in the house. I went back to the car. Tried to back up, and the car wouldn't move. I got up and looked around real close, and it was the driver's side front wheel was buried in the ground, and the front end of the car was sitting on the ground. It's like the tire had fell in a hole, and there wasn't any hole there. And I'm wondering what's going on. I said, man, I don't know what I'm going to do about this. So she was already in the house. So I went around the side of the house and knocked on her bedroom window to get her attention. And I told her what was wrong. So turned on the lights and all. Her mom and daddy both got up, and daddy comes walking outside, and he looks and he saw where the wheel was, and he said, oh, that's the cesspool.
The old cesspool.
The old cesspool from your grandma's house. And I'm looking at, I said, there wasn't no hole there. He said, well, that's where it was, and they threw a bunch of wood and stuff and all that, and they just filled it in. That's where the side of his driveway was. Well, when I pulled up in there, that wheel came right over a spot where they must have been some old rotten wood or something, and the wheel fell all the way down in it.
So it was her mother that told you, or you told her, I better call Mama. So you went in the house, and because you didn't have cell phones or anything at that time.
I don't know. I ended up getting a jack, or I think I had to get the jack out of the car and put a piece of plywood down or something, and I had to jack it up out of that hole so I could get out. There wasn't no other way to get out of there.
And I remember Flo talked to me on the phone too. So she said, yes, he's stuck in our cesspool. So they figured, well, they might not believe you when you tell them that. So you handed the phone to Miss Flo, and
I wouldn't believe it myself.
So she told me, yes, he's stuck in a cesspool, but he'll be getting out soon, and he'll be home. So that's how that went. But and y'all used to go. All the kids at Nichols used to go to the Foundry. There,
amongst other places.
Yeah, but the Foundry was a real popular place.
That was one of them.
Yeah. And do they still call it the Foundry now? I mean, they remodeled, and it's not quite the same as then, but I think they still call it the Foundry.
Building's still there.
Yeah, the building and
they
everything.
still call it the same thing, but it's not what it was back then.
No. Okay, so that's college and all that, and then you and Carol got married, and you wanted always to stay in Pierre Part. You didn't want to move someplace else like Debbie moved to Houma, but you said you wanted to stay in Pierre Part. So you fixed up Daddy's what was supposed to be Daddy's workshop into a little apartment. And you and Carol lived there for 2 years. Then y'all built your house over there. And with everybody coming on weekends and all that, y'all pretty much did y'all frame it up, or did you have? I can't remember now.
No, we did. We framed it up.
You did all the framework, but you had
Had-
the bricks and all.
We had EJ Bro farm up the slab and did the plumbing in the slab, but we framed it up and put the roof on it. Not the shingles, but we put the roof, everything up to the paper.
And then had the, of course, because y'all it's a brick home, so y'all had the bricks put on. So yeah, y'all did your house.
Well, you missed a lot though. When I was going to school, when I graduated from high school, that's the first summer that I actually worked close to doing the same thing I'm doing now. Before I got out of high school, I worked at the Mercury Outboard Shop, Mr. Albert's Outboard Shop. I started one summer, worked all summer, and then I ended up working after I'd get out of school. I'd go to work over there. I'd get there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'd close at 5, but they'd let me stay. A couple of hours later, after we closed up the shop, I'd lock the shop up, and I'd work in there by myself for a couple of hours. I did that a lot when I was in high school. But then when I graduated from high school, I started with Daddy actually as electrician's helper doing summer help. Because I actually worked in a plant, the fertilizer plant, and I was 17 years old at the time, and I wasn't supposed to be there until I was 18.
But
I ended up working there as electrician's helper.
Daddy's foreman, though, he knew how old you were, but he let you do it anyways.
Well, yeah, he let it slide until after I went back to school. Then he finally turned in my paperwork.
But you were 18 about that time then.
No, not quite.
Not quite.
They make 18 till that November.
Yeah, right.
Old man Larry.
Yeah, old man Kelly Bro. First man I worked for in a plant officially, and I wasn't official because I wasn't old enough. But I was 17 years old now. Just about every summer or semester break, or even spring break, I was working in a plant somewhere doing electrical work. 'Cause I worked. I even made a round at the Exxon refinery one winter. That was a semester break. Worked at Exxon refinery. I worked at a mobile gas plant. Worked at a Willow Glen power station.
You and that other nigga?
Running ground cable in the ground. Me and the other niggers. Hey, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of where, well, me and Gary, we'd work with Daddy, doing electrical work around the house and all that stuff. And we'd go with him whenever he'd go to work on something. But I worked in the plants and all that. That's where I got my background. Went to Nichols, got a degree in electrical engineering technology, and ended up staying in the field in electrical some way or another because that was how we got started.
So, actually, then you were doing electrical work at one of the plants and you got laid off. You and Gary both didn't have a job.
Well,
So, how did that come up?
no, he started.
How did that come about for you to get on with Chevron? Is what I'm getting.
Well,
to.
we started working for Brown and Root on a big job at Texaco Refinery in Convent. We were actually working with a crew doing construction. When that job gave up, we ended up working for a little maintenance contractor in a steel mill in Laplace. It was a 2-week turnaround that turned into 2 months. We worked 7/12s, 7/14s, 7/16s, however many hours they let us work, we worked it. We'd leave when it was dark and we got back when it was dark. Well, that job ended because the plant had some labor problems, and they ran off all the contractors. So we ended up being unemployed. And during that time, like I said, I was on unemployment for a couple of months. But we had worked for 2 months solid, 12 hours a day or more every day. It turns out Carol's daddy was working part-time in a grocery store. I think he was checking in merchandise. And they had a guy over there who was an electrician that worked for Chevron offshore that worked on his days off at that same store, and he was doing the maintenance. He was, I think he was up on a ladder working on a light fixture or something, and Mr. David walked by him, and he used to joke around with him and said, "Hey, you think it's going to work when you get done with it?" And he said, "Yeah, of course it will." He said, "Why you say that?" He said, "Oh, my son-in-law is an electrician." He said, "I'd do the same thing to him." I said, "I asked him if it's going to work when he gets done with it." And it was Mr. Russell Dewey was his name. And Mr. Russell, he asked David, he said, who does your son work for? He said, "Well, right now he don't work for nobody." He said he was laid off, but he said he was an electrician in the plants. He said, "Well," he says, "I work offshore for Chevron as an electrician." He says, "You ever thought about working offshore?" And he was talking about me and my brother Gary at the time, because he told him both of us was laid off. He said, "No," and he never talked about it. He says, "Well," he says, I got a name of somebody that he might want to call and talk to him and just see if he can come up with something." He says, "Because I know they're always hiring." So he gave him the name of this engineer out of New Orleans, actually Elmwood office. And I gave him a call, or he gave me a call, and Mr. Russell told me, "Look, get in touch with this guy, and talk to him, and see if you can come up with something, and maybe he can hook you up." So I told Gary about it. We ended up preparing a resume and all that, and I called the man. And he told me where his office was in Elmwood, and he told me to come see him. So me and Gary took a drive one day, and we went to the Elmwood office and told him we were there to see a Richard Mason, who was an electrical engineer out of the Elmwood office. So the receptionist said, "I have so-and-so and so-and-so here to see Mr. Richard Mason," and she paged him. And she looks at me and Gary and says, "He doesn't have any appointment with anybody. He doesn't know who y'all are or whatever." But then he must have told her. He said, "Well, look, being they're here, tell him to come up and see me." So we thought we had an appointment, but it turns out we were just on a run. We didn't know why they didn't know we were coming. We thought he did. So we went upstairs, 4th floor, I believe it was. Knocked on the man's door, found his office, and we walked in, told him who we were, introduced ourselves, showed him we had a copy of a resume and all that, and they asked us what kind of work were we looking for. I said, "Well, we're unemployed right now. We're looking for anything in the electrical field." Said both of us had college. I had a 4-year degree. Gary had a 2-year degree. And he explained to us that Chevron hired their engineers through a recruiting program. And they didn't hire directly off the street. They hired them in a recruiting program in college. He said, "But I see y'all have quite a bit of extensive experience working in the field with your tools as electricians." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Have you ever considered working offshore as a maintenance electrician?" I said, "No, we never really thought about it." He said, "Well, I tell you what, from what I see right here," I said, "y'all might fit in because y'all have quite a bit of practical experience." So he called an electrical foreman in Amelia, in Bayou Buff Base in Morgan City, a man named Mr. Neil Willett. He told him he was talking to 2 fellas that had a lot of experience, that maybe he'd want to talk to us. So that time it was definitely an appointment that was set up. He ended up setting up an appointment with Gary and I with Mr. Willett in Morgan City. So we talked for a little while longer. He told us he appreciated our time. We told him we appreciated his time. We didn't know if there was some misunderstanding about coming and see him. He said, "No, it was a pleasure talking to y'all," and we left. So I looked at Gary. I said, "Here we go again." Well, we ended up in Morgan City, and we went to talk to Mr. Neal and the area superintendent. It was two of them across the table from me and Gary. We were sitting in a conference room in that Morgan City office, and we didn't realize it at the time, but that was a job interview. They told us to come back next Wednesday, a week from then, if we wanted to go to work offshore, but they'd hire us on through a contract company. And they said if they like what they saw and we like what we saw after a certain amount of time, could be up to 6 months, they consider hiring us on with the company, with Chevron. So we looked at each other and we figured out what they was going to get paid. And we said, well, it's a little bit more than unemployment. So we said, we'll be here. So we showed up that following Wednesday. We went offshore. They sent us in different directions. And,
Being two brothers, they would not send y'all out together.
well, not necessarily. They tried not to. It didn't mean it wouldn't happen. But they weren't going to send us to the same place because we were both in the same trade. Found out they needed electricians out there pretty bad at that time, which the oil field wasn't in too good a shape back in 1984, but Chevron needed electricians right at that time in Morgan City. So we went offshore for a week. In the middle of we came home for 7 days. We went offshore again. In the middle of our second week, they called us up and asked us if we wanted to work for Chevron. And if we did, when we came in, we would sign papers, go to the doctor, get a physical, and when next time we went back to work, we would be working for Chevron. So officially, November the 7th, 1984, Gary and I hired on with Chevron. So some almost 32 years ago, we started working for Chevron offshore.
So that's where we are today. Still where, well,
Yeah,
Still-
as at least of right now, I still have a job with Chevron. Like I said, going on 32 years. Fixing to go out to a deep water facility that takes about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes to fly by helicopter to get to. They're about a mile deep of water, which is somewhere I've never worked before. It's not. I mean, I've worked offshore, but this is something completely different. But anyway, that's where I ended up.
okay. That's about where we are today then.